It's an interesting concept. Administrations and legislators need at all times to be aware of the fact that it is irresponsible behaviour to continuously rely on deficit financing. They are not spending the government's money but the people's money, and the debts incurred ultimately have to be paid by the people. They need to be reminded of that and reminded constantly of that. So, what would be good? It would be good if we had results transparency. It would be good if we had financial and purchasing transparency. It would be good if we had program performance and results transparency. It would be good if we had an informed public where they could actually get the information. And more we're going to see citizen-initiated democracy, in my view. The internet's going to allow us to get onto the desktop of our legislators at a moment's notice saying, I think what you're doing stinks. And the more that happens, the more, as legislators, we better be prepared to have the right answers to those particular questions. So, being smart operators, in my view, would be that we would stop doing things that don't need to be done by the government. In my own experience, that's probably about half. And interestingly, if you stop doing it, it doesn't necessarily not get provided. You'll find that somebody else will do it. An interesting anecdote. I told this on many occasions before. One occasion when I was in Cabinet, the Department of Transportation came to us. They wanted to increase the fees for driver licensing. We said to them, why? They said, government policy says now we've got to fully recover the cost of these things. And we said, okay, why do we do it? And they said, well, obviously everybody needs a driver's license. And I said to them, I got my driver's license when I was 15. Tell me, what is there about the process of renewing it that tests my competency as a driver? And that was a harder question. And they said, we need to think about it. So we gave them 10 days. They came back in 10 days and they had to say, we can't find a good reason for renewing driver's licenses. So we gave people lifetime driver's licenses. They don't need to renew them again until they're 74 years of age, after which they have to get an annual medical to show that they're physically fit to drive. You see, nobody had asked that question. Now, okay, they wanted to use it as an identity card. Different policy. Different policy. If you want identity cards, come out and say you want identity cards and what kind of information you're going to put in those identity cards. But don't masquerade the driver's license of those sort of things. So stop doing things that don't need to be done by government. Stop doing things that don't work. That's pretty obvious. Learn to say no. And learn to keep saying no. Most things keep coming back to you. You've got to say no and stay with it. And eliminating all spending that doesn't produce clear public benefits. They seem like pretty easy challenges. Here's what some other countries have done. I'm going to touch on them very briefly. A lot of countries are battling with the kind of budget problems that we see across the United States. There are 3 countries, I just gave testimony in front of the Senate 2 weeks ago on this issue. And they asked me to find places that had a long history of deficit financing and had changed their behaviour and were now running surpluses. And find countries that are similar to the United States. So I found 3, New Zealand, Australia and the United Kingdom. Australia and the United Kingdom passed legislation in 1998 defining fiscal responsibility and converted to accrual accounting. Since that time, Australia has run continuous surpluses and has brought its public debt down to 2% of GDP. The United Kingdom has run a budget surplus deficit of 0 on average over that period of time. Slight deficits on some occasions, slight surpluses on others. New Zealand is now in its 16th year of surpluses after having had 23 years of deficits. And New Zealand has retired virtually all of its public debt as well. Our debt used to be 67% of GDP. Today it's down to 2% of GDP. We run surpluses that are too big, and my government is, in my view, irresponsible by running surpluses that are too big, sometimes up as high as 8% of GDP. But they're a socialist government and they're not prepared to give tax cuts. And tax cuts is the only way they can get the surpluses down now. But they have prepaid Social Security forward to the year 2025. with surpluses rather than spending it. What we have is a unique situation where it seems that having defined fiscal responsibility, politicians are not prepared to brand themselves by their own actions as being fiscally irresponsible. So none of those countries have gone back into deficits during that combined period of 37 years. That's something that's a bit strange. There's something going on. We need to study that further to be able to understand it better. Now I'm going to give you a picture of what a department or a ministry that I had responsibility for looked like before and after transparency. We call them ministries. It's not because they pray a lot, but given the way they used to behave, that's probably one of the things that they should do. Because, like one of my colleagues, ALEC, says, the way government operates is really on faith-based initiatives. They spend money and hope for good results. We'd like something that's a bit more positive than that. So this ministry, the Ministry for Employment, when I inherited it, it thought that its job was to fix unemployment. Absolutely impossible. That's a macroeconomic problem and can't be fixed by microeconomic policy. They had unclear program goals. The programs were about helping people in need. Nice thing to do, but it needs to go further if you want to fix the problem. There were a multitude of process measures, the number of people in the program, satisfaction ratings and everything like that. The one thing they didn't measure was how good they were at getting people into work, which would seem as a pretty obvious measure that you should have. A lot of programs, 34 programs, a program for every problem, mainly instituted because of political desperation at high levels of unemployment, and an absence of any outcome measures. So that's what it looked like. This is what we changed it to. It had a clear vision. Its job now was to improve employability of unemployed people. That's you can do. You measure the success of that by counting how many people you got to work. I dropped 30 of the programs and kept 4 and put the resources into those 4 because when we measured them in terms of what was effective at getting people into work, these were the 4 that worked and the other 30 didn't or had very minimal results. So with clear outcome measures based on putting people into work, we got 300% more people into work for 40% less money. Think about that. A 300% improvement in the outcome for 40% less money. I better stop doing that. But also it was involved with a change to the appropriation system with much more transparency about appropriations. The old system appropriated $60 million to those programs. It allocated them to the different programs as they are listed here, and it placed about 40,000 people into work. We changed that so that now the government knew what it was buying. We call them purchase agreements. We very specifically wrote in the appropriation process what we expected to get, and it looked like this. Same quantity of money, $60 million. Place 120,000 unemployed people into work. Make sure that 56% of them are long-term unemployed. 25% of them are Maori people, etc., going down through. Very, very clear, specific instructions. In a year's time, we can go back and look at how many of those goals they hit, and why they missed some of them, and why they did better on some of them. That gives you some real power as a legislator to be able to say, yeah, we're doing good, or no, we're doing bad. Here's another one, doing the same thing with the Inland Revenue Service. The mission is to collect the revenue owed.